The morning Captain Aldric Thorne became nothing more than Private Thorne. The sky over Fort Ironhold wept cold rain that tasted of ash and iron. He stood in the central courtyard, stripped of his officer's cloak, his medals torn from his chest one by one before the assembled 3rd Legion. Each metallic clink as they hit the cobblestones felt like a hammer striking an anvil inside his skull. The soldiers he had led for 7 years through the Smoking Hills campaign, through the siege of Ravenwatch, through countless skirmishes against goblinoid raiders stared at him with expressions ranging from pity to bitter satisfaction. General Marvis Blackwood's voice carried across the courtyard with the authority of a thunderwave spell, though he wielded no magic, only power. Aldric Thorne, you are hereby demoted to the rank of private for gross negligence resulting in the death of 23 soldiers under your command. You will serve in the frontline infantry until such time as your debt to the fallen is paid, or until the gods themselves call you home. Aldric's jaw clenched. Negligence. The word was a poisoned dart. He had sent his unit to secure the eastern flank during the Battle of Grimridge Pass, based on intelligence reports that proved catastrophically wrong. The enemy, a combined force of hobgoblins and their hired human mercenaries, had been 3 times the reported strength, and they had known the terrain with predatory intimacy. His soldiers had been caught in a killing field of crossbow bolts and alchemical fire. He had pulled 14 survivors out himself, his sword arm drenched to the elbow in blood that wasn't his own, but 23 had not made it home. The intelligence officer who had provided the false information? Promoted, transferred to a comfortable position in the capital. Politics, Aldric had learned, was a sharper blade than any sword. As the ceremony concluded, Aldric was handed his new assignment, a simple spear, a worn leather cuirass that smelled of someone else's sweat, and orders to report to Sergeant Grimm's company, the unit assigned to the vanguard of the next major offensive against the Crimson Coalition. The vanguard meant first into battle, first to die. It was a sentence disguised as duty. The rain intensified as Aldric walked toward the barracks that would now house him alongside common soldiers. He passed familiar faces, Lieutenant Hayes, who wouldn't meet his eyes, Commander Sterling, who offered the barest nod of acknowledgement. Only one person stepped directly into his path. Corporal Elena Brightwater, a half-elf battle mage whose talent with Scorching Ray had saved his life at Ravenwatch, stood with arms crossed. Her amber eyes, inheritance from her elven mother, gleamed with anger that wasn't directed at him. "This is horseshit, sir." "Everyone knows, it's just Aldric now," he interrupted, his voice rough. "And everyone knows exactly what they've been told to know." The intelligence was compromised. Anyone with half a brain has already decided it's easier to blame the field commander than investigate corruption in the officer corps. Aldric adjusted the strap of his new, significantly lighter pack. "Don't make this harder, Elena. You've got a career ahead of you. Keep your head down." She grabbed his arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "Sergeant Grimm's company has a 40% casualty rate. They're called the Grinder for a reason. Then I suppose I'll need to be lucky. Luck runs out. Aldric!" He finally met her eyes. "Then I'll need to be better than lucky." The barracks for Grimm's company occupied the oldest section of Fort Ironhold, where the stone walls bore scorch marks from a dragon attack 3 decades prior. A reminder that humanity's wars were often interruptions between nature's true violence. Inside, the air hung thick with the smell of weapon oil, stale beer, and the particular musk of soldiers who had stopped caring about comfort long ago. Aldric found his bunk, a thin mattress on a wooden frame, 3rd from the left in a row of 20. The soldier on the neighboring bunk looked up from sharpening a hunting knife. He was young, perhaps 19, with the broad shoulders of a farmhand and a scar that split his left eyebrow. "You're the new meat?" the young soldier asked. "Private Thorne." The soldier's eyebrows rose. "Captain Thorne?" "The one who—" He stopped himself, reading something in Aldric's expression. "Sorry, I'm Marcus. Marcus Ironfoot." "Yes, like the dwarf clan, but I'm full human. My great-grandfather just had a sense of humor, or a complicated personal life," Aldric offered, and was rewarded with a surprised laugh. "Fair point." Marcus returned to his knife. "Sergeant Grimm will want to see you before evening mess. He's particular about new additions to his collection of doomed souls. Cheerful bunch, aren't you? We're realistic. The Coalition's been pushing hard at the Thornwall. Word is they've got something new, some kind of war magic that turns the ground itself against defenders. Siege wizards from Kelmer, maybe, or darker things from the Shadowfell. Either way, we're being sent to plug the gap. Marcus tested the blade's edge against his thumb. Most of us figure we've got maybe one more battle in us before the odds catch up. Aldric sat on his bunk, feeling the thin mattress compress under his weight. Through the narrow window, he could see the training yard where soldiers drilled in formation. He had stood on the observation platform countless times, evaluating tactics, making notes, planning strategies that would keep his people alive. Now he would be one of the formations, one of the faceless soldiers advancing on command. "Does that bother you?" Aldric asked, knowing the odds. Marcus considered this. "My Dia used to say that life's a loan from the gods, and eventually they call it back with interest. I figure I've had 20 good years. Some folks don't get that much." He pointed the knife toward the far end of the barracks. "See Garrett over there? The big guy with the red beard? He's been with the grinder for 4 years. 4. That's practically immortal in this company. Know what his secret is? Good instincts. He doesn't think of himself as alive. Says once you accept you're already dead, fear can't slow you down." Marcus shrugged. "Sounds like madness to me, but he's the one still breathing." Before Aldric could respond, the barracks door crashed open. A man built like a mountain with skin the color of weathered oak entered, his presence filling the space with immediate authority. Sergeant Grimm wore his scars like medals, a burn covering half his neck, a missing piece of his left ear, and a limp that suggested an old injury to his right leg. His eyes, however, were sharp and calculating, the eyes of someone who had survived by being smarter than those trying to kill him. "Private Thorne," Grimm's voice was gravel wrapped in leather. "With me, now." Aldric rose and followed the sergeant out of the barracks, across the muddy training yard to a small office that smelled of tobacco and old parchment. Grimm closed the door and gestured to a chair. Aldric remained standing. "Sit," Grimm ordered. "That wasn't a request." Aldric sat. Grimm circled behind his desk but didn't sit himself. He picked up a clay pipe, packed it with tobacco from a worn pouch, and lit it with a minor prestidigitation cantrip, the only magic Aldric had seen the man use. The sergeant exhaled a cloud of sweet-smelling smoke. "I've read your file," Grimm began. 7 years as an officer. Commendations for bravery, tactical innovation, and this is my favorite part, exceptional care for the welfare of soldiers under command." He tapped ash from the pipe. 23 dead at Grimridge. "That must burn. Every day. Good. Guilt keeps a soldier sharp. Regret makes them hesitate." Grimm finally sat, his damaged leg extended stiffly. "Here's what's going to happen, Thorne. You're going to forget you were ever a captain. You're going to take orders without question. You're going to advance when I say advance, hold when I say hold, and die if that's what's needed to keep the line intact. Clear? Crystal, I don't care about your tactical brilliance or your leadership experience. I don't care if you can recite every battle in the War of the Shattered Crown. In my company, you're a spear carrier, a body information. You exist to fill space and bleed on command." Grimm's eyes narrowed. "But I'll tell you what I do care about. I care about soldiers who keep their heads when everything goes to hell. I care about people who can think when arrows are falling and the ground's shaking from artillery spells. Can you do that, Private?" Aldric met the sergeant's gaze. "Yes, we'll see." Dismissed. As Aldric reached the door, Grimm spoke again. "One more thing. Your reputation precedes you. Half the men will resent you for being here, thinking you'll try to take over. The other half will expect you to save them because you're some kind of tactical genius. Both expectations will get people killed. You understand?" "I understand." "Then prove it. Starting tomorrow, we march for the Thornwall. 3 days hard travel, then straight into whatever fresh hell the Coalition has prepared for us." Grimm relit his pipe. "Try not to die on the first day. I hate breaking in replacements." That night, Aldric lay on his bunk listening to the sounds of the barracks. Snoring, whispered conversations, the occasional cough or cry from a nightmare. Marcus had been right about the company's fatalism. It permeated the air like smoke from a smoldering fire. These were men and women who had calculated their remaining time in days rather than years. He thought about the general's words, "Death to the fallen." As if death could be repaid with more death, as if the scales of justice could be balanced by throwing more lives onto the pile. The logic was sound by military standards, but it tasted of ashes in his mind. Through the window, He could see stars emerging as the rain cleared. Somewhere out there, the Crimson Coalition was preparing their next move. And in 3 days, he would meet them not as a commander plotting strategy from a protected position, but as a soldier in the vanguard where the first arrows flew and the first blood spilled. The weight of his lost rank pressed down like a physical burden, but beneath it something else stirred. A question he couldn't quite articulate. What if survival wasn't about tactics or strategy or even luck? What if it was about something simpler, something he had forgotten in his years of command? He closed his eyes, knowing sleep would be elusive, and wondered if he would live long enough to find the answer. The column moved like a steel serpent through the gray wood. 300 soldiers stretched along the forest road in disciplined formation. Aldric marched in the 5th rank of Sergeant Grimm's company, his spear resting against his shoulder, his boots finding rhythm with the countless steps before him. The weight of the pack on his back, 30 pounds of rations, bedroll, cooking pot, spare clothes, and personal effects, had seemed manageable in the fort. After 4 hours of marching, it felt like carrying a dwarf. Marcus Ironfoot kept pace beside him, occasionally whistling a tavern tune that Aldric recognized as the Maid of Millhaven, though Marcus's version was considerably more obscene. On Aldric's other side marched a woman named Sira Blackthorne, a human ranger from the Northern Territories, whose dark skin bore ritual scarring and patterns that told stories Aldric didn't know how to read. She moved with the economy of motion that came from years in the wilderness, never wasting energy on unnecessary movement. "First long march?" she asked, not looking at him. "First as a private. Different when you're carrying your own gear instead of riding a horse beside the column." It wasn't quite mockery, but close. Officers always underestimate what they ask of infantry. "I carried my own gear plenty of times," Aldric responded, then caught himself. Defensive. He was being defensive, which meant she had struck a nerve. But you're right. It's different when it's mandatory rather than a choice. Sarah's expression softened fractionally. "Feet holding up? So far. Check them tonight." Blisters on day 1 become infections by day 3. And infected feet can't march. She adjusted her own pack with a practiced shrug. Lost a friend that way once. Gangrene took his leg, fever took the rest. All from a blister he ignored. The forest pressed close on both sides. Ancient oaks and sentinel pines creating a canopy that filtered the sunlight into shifting patterns of green and gold. Birds called warnings to each other as the column passed, and somewhere in the distance, a creek burbled over stones. It would have been beautiful, if not for the context, that they were marching toward war, toward death, toward whatever horrors the Crimson Coalition had prepared. At midday, Sergeant Grimm called a halt. The soldiers broke formation with practiced efficiency, finding shade, drinking from canteens, checking equipment. Aldric found a fallen log and sat, grateful for the respite. His shoulders ached from the pack straps, and his feet felt hot in his boots, not blistered yet, but the warning signs were there. Marcus appeared with a small clay jar. "Here, Des' special recipe." Rendered fat, beeswax, and something he claimed was powdered moonstone, but was probably just chalk. "Rub it on your feet before we start again. Thank you." Aldric accepted the jar, surprised by the gesture. "Don't thank me yet. It smells like a troll's armpit, and if Grimm catches you using it, he'll make some comment about pampered officers." "But it works," Marcus grinned. "Besides, I need you functional. You're the most interesting person I've talked to in months, and I'd hate to lose you to something as boring as foot rot." As Aldric removed his boots, Marcus was right about the smell. A commotion erupted near the front of the column. Raised voices, the sound of metal scraping metal. He pulled his boots back on and moved toward the disturbance, old instincts kicking in before he remembered he had no authority to intervene. 2 soldiers faced each other in a loose circle of onlookers. One was Garrett, the red-bearded veteran Marcus had pointed out earlier. The other was a younger man Aldric didn't recognize, perhaps 25, with the build of a city guardsman and the cocky posture of someone who hadn't been properly humbled by combat. "Saying I'm a coward?" The younger soldier was saying, his hand on his sword hilt. "I'm saying you volunteered for rear supply detail 3 times in the last month." Garrett responded, his voice calm but his body language dangerous. "And I'm saying that soldiers who engineer safe positions while others die tend to have accidents in battle. Friendly fire incidents. Happens all the time. That's a threat. That's a fact." Sergeant Grimm materialized from nowhere. his limp somehow not impeding his speed. Garrett, Brennan, step back. Both soldiers obeyed immediately, though the younger one, Brennan, looked ready to spit nails. This is settled, Grim announced to the gathered soldiers. Brennan, you're on Point Scout rotation starting tomorrow. If you're so eager to prove you're not a coward, you can walk 50 yards ahead of the column and give us advance warning of ambushes. He turned to Garrett. And you, old man, save your energy for the enemy. We clear? Clear, Sergeant. Crystal. The crowd dispersed. Aldric caught Garrett's eye as the veteran moved past. There was something in that gaze, a coldness that went beyond the usual soldier's pragmatism. Marcus had said Garrett survived by thinking of himself as already dead, but Aldric wondered if there was more to it. Men who stopped valuing their own lives sometimes stopped valuing others' lives as well. The afternoon march proved harder than the morning. The road climbed steadily upward, following the contours of the land toward the Thornwall, the massive range of mountains that separated the kingdom's heartland from the contested territories beyond. Aldric's calves burned, his back ached, and the pack straps had rubbed his shoulders raw despite his attempts to adjust them. Around him, soldiers engaged in the time-honored tradition of making misery more bearable through conversation. Sarah told stories about tracking a manticore through the Frostpine Mountains, her voice carrying a hunter's appreciation for a worthy prey. Marcus shared increasingly implausible tales about his family's encounters with actual dwarves, including one about his great-uncle supposedly winning a drinking contest against a clan chief. Others discussed rumors about the Crimson Coalition's new tactics, each version more frightening than the last. Heard they've got siege wizards who can cast Wall of Stone but make it move like a wave of earth that just crashes over defenders, one soldier claimed. Bullshit, another responded. If they had that kind of power, they'd have won already. Maybe they're saving it. Maybe they want us to commit everything before they show their hand. Aldric listened but didn't contribute. He had learned long ago that rumor and speculation were natural parts of soldier culture, ways to process fear and uncertainty. Some of it might even be true. Intelligence reports had suggested the coalition had recruited spellcasters from the Kalmar Dominion, a nation known for innovative and brutal battle magic. But reports had been wrong before, 23 times wrong. As evening approached, the column reached a designated campsite, a cleared area beside a stream, used by military forces for generations. Soldiers fell out of formation and began the practice routine of establishing a perimeter, setting up tents, and starting cooking fires. Aldric helped Marcus and Sarah erect their shared tent, a canvas structure that would barely fit 3 bedrolls, but would keep the rain off if weather turned. While Sarah gathered firewood, Aldric checked his feet. 2 blisters were forming, one on each heel, but they hadn't broken yet. He applied more of Marcus's foul-smelling ointment, wrapped them in strips of cloth torn from an old undershirt, and put on a dry pair of socks. Small measures, but in military life, small measures often meant the difference between functionality and breakdown. Dinner was a communal affair. Hardtack softened in a stew made from dried vegetables, preserved meat, and whatever could be foraged nearby. It tasted like salted cardboard, but it was hot and filling. Aldric ate mechanically, fueling his body more than satisfying any hunger. As darkness settled over the camp, watch rotations were established. Aldric drew second watch, midnight to 2 in the morning, which gave him time to rest before his turn. He lay in the tent between Marcus and Sarah, listening to the sounds of the camp settling down. Somewhere, a soldier played a wooden flute, the melody melancholic and sweet. Conversations drifted through the fabric walls, fragments of lives and dreams and fears. "Think we'll actually make it to the Thornwall?" Marcus asked quietly. "The march?" "Yes," Sarah answered. "The battle after?" "Ask me then." Always so cheerful, Sarah. Realistic. "There's a difference." Silence stretched. Then Marcus spoke again, his voice softer. "My duh said I should have stayed on the farm. Said the land always needs tending, and there's honor in that, but I wanted, I don't know, adventure? Purpose? Something bigger than plowing fields and harvesting wheat. And now?" Aldric asked. "Now I'm marching toward a battle that'll probably kill me. Sleeping on the ground, and my feet hurt so bad I might cry," but Marcus paused. "But at least I'm not wondering, what if, you know? At least I'll die knowing I tried to be part of something. We might not die," Sarah said, though her tone suggested she didn't believe it. "We might not," Marcus agreed. But if we do, I hope it's quick. And I hope whoever survives remembers we were here." Aldric stared at the tent's ceiling, thinking about memory and legacy. As a captain, he had been responsible for keeping records of fallen soldiers, writing letters to families, ensuring that deaths meant something beyond statistics. Now he was one of the names that might appear on such lists. Private Aldric Thorne, killed in action. No special notation, no recognition of past service. Just another casualty. The weight of that anonymity should have bothered him more than it did. Instead, he felt something unexpected, a kind of freedom. No one expected him to be brilliant or heroic. No one was watching his every decision, waiting for him to fail. He was just another soldier, and in that ordinariness, there was a strange peace. His watch shift arrived too quickly. Aldric rose quietly, pulled on his boots, and took up his spear. The camp was a constellation of dying fires and dark tents. He joined the other sentries on the perimeter, taking his assigned position near the southern approach. The forest at night was alive with sounds, insects, nocturnal animals, the wind through leaves. Aldric's eyes adjusted slowly to the darkness, picking out shapes and shadows. His mind wandered, processing the day's experiences. The march had been a lesson in humility, stripping away the comfortable distance he had maintained as an officer. These soldiers weren't abstractions or tactical units. They were people with fears and hopes, stories and dreams. Marcus with his inherited name and fear of dying without meaning. Sarah with her ranger's pragmatism and unspoken grief for a friend lost to infection. Even Garrett with his unsettling philosophy of survival through emotional death. They were all trying to make sense of a war that cared nothing for their individual existences. A branch cracked in the forest. Aldric's hand tightened on his spear, his breathing slowing as he focused on the direction of the sound. His training took over, identify the threat, assess the danger, respond appropriately. He waited, perfectly still, listening. A deer emerged from the shadows, its eyes reflecting the distant firelight. It looked at him for a long moment, then bounded away into the darkness. Aldric exhaled slowly, forcing his muscles to relax. False alarm. But the rush of adrenaline had clarified something in his mind. He was afraid. Not of dying. He had made peace with that possibility years ago, but of dying pointlessly. Of becoming another number in a casualty report, another name forgotten by history. His 2 hours passed without further incident. He woke his replacement, returned to the tent, and fell into an exhausted sleep. The second day's march was harder. Muscles that had been merely tired were now actively protesting. Aldric's blisters had broken despite his precautions, and each step sent sharp pains through his heels. Around him, other soldiers showed similar signs of wear. Limps, winces, the careful movements of bodies pushed to their limits. But they marched. Because that was what soldiers did. They marched when their bodies screamed for rest, fought when fear demanded flight, and endured because the alternative was unthinkable. By noon, the Thorn Wall was visible in the distance. A jagged line of peaks crowned with snow, beautiful and terrible in their immensity. Somewhere beyond those mountains, the enemy waited. And in less than a day, Aldric would face them not as a commander but as a soldier in the first rank, where survival was measured in heartbeats and luck. The Thornwall fortress squatted against the mountainside like a stone toad, its walls scarred by decades of conflict. Aldric and the 3rd Legion arrived at dusk on the 3rd day, their column filing through the massive iron gates into a courtyard that smelled of smoke, forge fires, and unwashed humanity. The fortress was a warren of contradictions. Ancient stonework patched with newer construction, elegant elven architecture crushed against functional human engineering, and everywhere the signs of recent combat, scorched walls, hastily repaired breaches, and a field hospital tent from which screams occasionally emerged. Sergeant Grimm assembled his company in a corner of the courtyard, while other units dispersed to their assigned positions. The soldiers stood at attention, trying to project discipline despite their exhaustion. Grimm paced before them, his limp more pronounced after 3 days of hard marching. "Tomorrow at dawn we assault the coalition's forward position at Blackridge Pass," Grimm announced without preamble. "Intelligence suggests they fortified the southern approach with earthworks and have at least 200 defenders, including a contingent of hobgoblin shock troops and human mercenaries. Our objective is to break through their lines and secure the pass, which will allow our siege weapons to be moved into position against their main fortress." A map materialized as Grimm gestured. A minor illusion spell projected onto the air, Apparently, the sergeant had more magical ability than he typically displayed. The map showed the terrain in detail. The narrow pass, the enemy fortifications, the approach routes. First wave, that's us. We'll advance under covering fire from our archers and battle mages. We'll close to melee range, engage their defenders, and hold position while the second wave exploits any breaches. Expected casualties are 40 to 60%. Grim let that number hang in the air. Questions? Brennan, the soldier who had been reassigned to point scout duty, raised his hand. 3 days of walking ahead of the column through potentially hostile territory had hollowed out his earlier cockiness. What about their war magic? The rumors about earth-moving spells? Confirmed. They have at least 3 casters capable of transmutation magic. Expect the ground itself to be weaponized, pitfalls, sudden barriers, possibly even stone shape used offensively. Grim's expression was grim. Our countermeasure is speed and dispersion. We don't clump up, we don't hesitate. And we sure as hell don't give their casters time to concentrate their fire. Marcus spoke up. Rules of engagement, Sergeant. Kill anything in coalition colors. Spare anyone who surrenders. Loot the dead after we've secured the position, not before. Grim dismissed the illusion. Get fed. Get whatever rest you can and make peace with your gods. Dawn comes early, and so does death. The company dispersed. Aldric followed Marcus and Sierra to the mess hall, a cavernous room filled with long tables and the smell of institutional cooking. The food was better than trail rations, actual bread, a vegetable stew with chunks of mystery meat, and weak beer, but Aldric barely tasted it. His mind was processing the tactical situation, old habits reasserting themselves despite his new rank. The assault plan was brutal but sound. The pass was a natural choke point, which meant the coalition couldn't bring their full numbers to bear, but also meant the attackers would be funneled into a killing field. The transmutation magic was the real problem. A skilled caster using mold earth or stone shape could turn the battlefield into a nightmare of obstacles and traps. And if they had access to higher level spells like Wall of Stone or Earthquake, "You're thinking too much," Sarah observed, breaking into his thoughts. Old habits. Thinking gets you killed in the vanguard. You see an opening, you move. You see a threat, you kill it. Everything else is distraction. She tore off a piece of bread. I've seen brilliant tacticians freeze up in the chaos of melee because they were trying to process too much information. Don't be that person. How do you turn it off? Aldric asked. The analysis, the planning, the need to understand the whole battlefield? Sarah considered this. You don't turn it off. You redirect it. Focus on your immediate area. The 5 feet around you, the soldiers beside you, the enemies in front of you. The rest will handle itself or it won't, and either way, it's beyond your control. Marcus leaned in. I just think about my Diaz farm. Specifically about mucking out the pig pens. If I can survive that smell for 20 years, I can survive a few minutes of combat? Despite everything, Aldric laughed. The sound felt strange, almost inappropriate given what awaited them at dawn. But it also felt necessary, a small rebellion against the weight of mortality. After dinner, Aldric walked the fortress walls, needing space to think. Other soldiers had the same idea, small clusters smoking pipes or dice games in the torchlight. The mountains loomed overhead, their peaks lost in darkness. Somewhere beyond them, the Crimson Coalition was preparing for tomorrow's battle. He found a quiet section of wall and leaned against the cold stone. Below, in the courtyard, he could see the field hospital tent. Healers moved between patients, soldiers wounded in previous engagements, waiting for either recovery or death. The fort's chief cleric, a middle-aged human woman with silver-streaked hair, emerged from the tent and began casting what looked like lesser restoration on a soldier, with a badly infected wound. The spell's soft blue glow pulsed, then faded. The soldier would live. Private Thorne. Aldric turned to find Corporal Elena Brightwater standing a few feet away. The half-elf battle mage wore her regulation robes, but her posture was tense, angry. Corporal, Aldric acknowledged. I'm part of the covering fire detail tomorrow, which means I'll be watching you march into that pass. Her amber eyes caught the torchlight. This is insane. You shouldn't be in the vanguard. Your experience is irrelevant now. Like hell it is. Elena moved closer. I've been asking questions, Aldric. About Grimridge Pass, about the intelligence failure. And I've found some very interesting inconsistencies. Elena, don't. The intelligence officer who provided the false information. He's the nephew of Lord Chancellor Vex. And Vex has been consolidating power in the officer corps, removing anyone who might challenge his authority. You were popular with your troops, respected by other commanders. You were a threat. Aldric's stomach tightened. Even if that's true, and I'm not saying it is, what do you expect me to do? Accuse the Lord Chancellor of corruption based on circumstantial evidence? That's a fast way to end up in a military prison. Or worse. I expect you to survive tomorrow. Because once you've paid whatever imaginary debt they've hung around your neck, I'm going to prove what really happened at Grimridge. And I'm going to burn down everyone involved. Her voice was steel wrapped in silk. But I need you alive for that. I don't need revenge, Elena. Maybe not. But the 23 soldiers who died deserve the truth. And so do you. She pressed something into his hand. A small leather pouch. Healing potion. Military grade, not the watered-down swill they issue to infantry. If things go bad tomorrow, drink it. Don't be a martyr. Before he could respond, she was gone, disappearing into the shadows with the practiced stealth of someone trained in both combat and intrigue. Aldric opened the pouch. Inside was a crystal vial filled with red liquid that glowed faintly. Definitely higher quality than standard issue. He tucked it into an inner pocket of his tunic, then returned to the barracks. The building was quieter than usual. Soldiers prepared equipment with meticulous care, sharpening weapons, checking armor straps, writing letters they hoped wouldn't need to be sent. Marcus sat on his bunk, staring at a small wooden carving of a horse. Your D's work? Aldric asked. My brother's. He's better with wood than I ever was. Marcus set it carefully in his pack. If I don't make it back, someone will return my belongings to the farm. He'll know I was thinking about home, the weight of the moment pressed down. Tomorrow, some of these people would die. Statistics said 40 to 60% casualties. That meant almost half would survive, but the randomness of war meant there was no way to predict who would be lucky and who would join the statistics. Sleep was elusive. Aldric lay on his bunk, listening to the sounds of the barracks. Quiet prayers, suppressed crying, whispered conversations. Somewhere someone was singing softly, a lullaby in a language Aldric didn't recognize. The melody was beautiful and heartbreaking. He thought about Elena's words. Corruption in the officer corps. A conspiracy to remove him from power. Part of him wanted to dismiss it as paranoid speculation, but he had seen enough of military politics to know that ambitious men did terrible things in pursuit of advancement. And if it was true, if 23 soldiers had died not because of his negligence, but because of deliberate sabotage. No, he couldn't think about that now. Rach was a distraction, and Syrah was right. He needed to focus on the immediate, on survival, on the next 5 feet of ground. Dawn arrived too quickly, announced by bells and shouted orders. Soldiers rose like the dead, pulling on armor, gathering weapons, forming ranks in the courtyard. The fortress was controlled chaos. Units assembling, officers shouting instructions, supply wagons being loaded with medical equipment in anticipation of casualties. Sergeant Grimm's company formed up near the main gate. 200 soldiers in 5 ranks, spears and shields ready, faces set in expressions ranging from determination to terror. Aldric stood in the first rank, Marcus to his right, Syrah to his left. Garrett stood 3 positions down, his red beard freshly braided, his expression already dead. The fortress commander, a grizzled dwarf named Thorin Ironhelm, addressed the assembled forces from atop the wall. His voice, amplified by a thaumaturgy cantrip, boomed across the courtyard. Soldiers of the 3rd Legion, today we strike a blow against the Crimson Coalition. Today we prove that their walls mean nothing, their magic means nothing, their numbers mean nothing. Today we show them that free people, fighting for their homes, are worth 100 mercenaries fighting for gold. The speech continued, but Aldric tuned it out. He had heard variations of the same words before every major engagement. They were meant to inspire, to give meaning to the violence that would follow. Sometimes they even worked. The gates opened. The column began to move. They marched in formation through the pass, the mountain walls rising steeply on both sides. The terrain was treacherous, loose rocks, narrow pathways, places where a single misstep could send a soldier tumbling into ravines. Above, on the ridgelines, Aldric could see coalition sentries withdrawing, falling back to their fortified positions. After an hour of marching, the pass opened into a wider area, the killing field. Coalition fortifications were visible about 300 yards ahead. Earthworks topped with sharpened stakes, archer positions, and what looked like prepared spell circles for their casters. Defenders lined the walls, maybe 200 strong as intelligence had suggested, though Aldric knew there could be reserves hidden from view. Sergeant Grimm raised his hand. The column halted. Behind them, the archer companies and battle mage units were moving into position, preparing to provide covering fire. Aldric could see Elena among them, her hands already beginning to trace the somatic components of a spell. First rank, Grimm's voice cut through the morning air. On my mark, advance at double time. Second rank, follow at 50 paces. Do not stop for the wounded. Do not stop for the dead. You stop when you've reached their walls or when I give the order. Clear? Clear, Sergeant. 200 voices responded in rough unison. Grimm's sword came down. They charged. The world compressed into motion and sound. Aldric's legs pumped, his breath coming in sharp gasps, the weight of his armor suddenly negligible compared to the surge of adrenaline. Around him, soldiers roared battle cries or ran in grim silence. The ground beneath their feet was uneven, threatening to trip them, but the formation held. Coalition archers fired. The sky darkened with arrows. Aldric heard the whistle, raised his shield instinctively. Impacts, thunk, 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 arrows striking wood and metal. Screams erupted as soldiers fell, but the line couldn't stop. Behind them, the covering fire began. Elena's scorching rays streaked overhead, 3 bolts of flame that slammed into the coalition earthworks. Other battle mages followed suit, firebolts, ice knives, chromatic orbs, a cascade of destructive magic that momentarily suppressed the enemy archers. They closed to 200 yards. 150, 100, then the ground exploded. The coalition casters had timed it perfectly. Sections of earth simply erupted upward, stone shape turning solid ground into barriers and obstacles. Soldiers crashed into sudden walls, formations breaking apart. Aldric leaped over a newly formed ridge, landed badly, rolled, came up running. A pitfall opened directly in front of Marcus. The young soldier tried to change direction, couldn't plunged into the 10-foot deep hole with a scream. Aldric couldn't stop but registered the loss like a knife to the gut. 75 yards. 50. The coalition defenders met them with a wall of spears and swords. Aldric hit the line at full speed, his own spear driving forward. Impact, his weapon punched through a hobgoblin's leather armor, the creature's yellow eyes widening in surprise before it fell. Aldric yanked the spear free, blocked a sword strike with his shield, stabbed again. Around him, the first rank crashed into the coalition defenses like a wave against rocks. Blood sprayed. Men and hobgoblins screamed. Steel rang against steel. The world became a confusion of violence and terror, exactly as Sarah had warned. Aldric abandoned conscious thought. His training took over. Parry, strike, move, defend. A mercenary with a morning star came at him from the left. Aldric shifted his weight, let the weapon whistle past, drove his spear into the man's exposed side. The mercenary collapsed, gurgling. The coalition line was holding, but barely. More kingdom soldiers were pouring into the melee, pressure mounting. If they could just sustain the push for another minute, 2 minutes, the line would break. Then Aldric saw him. One of the coalition battle mages, a human in ornate robes, standing on a raised platform behind the main defenses. The mage's hands were moving through complex patterns, and Aldric recognized the spell even before the verbal components finished. Fireball, the 3rd-level evocation spell, detonated in the center of the kingdom formation. A massive sphere of flame expanded outward, consuming everything within 20 feet. Soldiers who had survived arrows and melee combat simply vanished in the inferno. The shockwave threw Aldric backward, his armor heating to painful temperatures, his ears ringing from the explosion. He landed hard, the breath knocked from his lungs. Around him, the survivors were in chaos, some fleeing, some trying to regroup, others simply lying still. The coalition was counterattacking, pushing forward to capitalize on the devastation. This was it, the moment where battles were won or lost. The moment where individual actions mattered. Aldric saw Sarah, also thrown by the blast, struggling to rise. Saw Garrett, miraculously unscathed, standing frozen in shock despite his philosophy of embracing death. Saw the coalition mage beginning another spell, this one looking like Wall of Fire based on the gestures. And Aldric made a choice. He surged to his feet, grabbed a fallen shield, and charged the mage's platform. A mercenary tried to intercept him. Aldric slammed the shield into the man's face with enough force to shatter bone, didn't slow down. He reached the platform's base, threw the shield at the mage to disrupt the spell, then launched himself upward. The mage's concentration broke. Wall of fire fizzled incomplete. Aldric tackled the spellcaster off the platform, both of them crashing to the ground. They grappled briefly. The mage was stronger than expected, enhanced by magical buffs. But Aldric got his hands around the man's throat and squeezed until the struggle stopped. He stood, breathing hard, and looked around. The Coalition defenders had seen their mage fall. Uncertainty rippled through their ranks. And in that moment of hesitation, Sergeant Grimm's voice cut through the chaos. "Second rank. Exploit the breach. First rank, reform on me." The surviving soldiers rallied. The second wave crashed into the wavering Coalition line. And suddenly, impossibly, the defenders were breaking, falling back, abandoning their fortifications in a disorganized retreat. They had won. But the cost? Aldric surveyed the battlefield. Bodies everywhere. Kingdom soldiers and Coalition fighters mixed in the grotesque democracy of death. He saw Marcus's wooden horse carving lying in the dirt near one of the pitfalls. Saw soldiers from his company, people he had marched with, eaten with, slept near, now reduced to corpses. 40 to 60% casualties, Grimm had predicted. Looking at the carnage, Aldric thought the sergeant might have been optimistic. The aftermath of battle was always worse than the fighting. Aldric had known this as an officer, but experiencing it as a common soldier. Covered in blood and ash, muscles trembling from exhaustion and adrenaline crash, brought the truth into sharp, painful focus. The living moved among the dead, checking for survivors, collecting identification tags, performing the grim arithmetic of casualties. Sergeant Grimm's company had entered the engagement with 200 soldiers. 97 were still standing. 41 confirmed dead, 62 wounded badly enough to be non-combat effective. The numbers were actually better than predicted, a dark miracle that felt more like mockery than blessing. Aldric found Marcus in the pitfall, unconscious but breathing. The young soldier had broken his leg in the fall, the bone visibly displaced beneath his trousers. 2 other soldiers had been less fortunate. The impact had killed them instantly. Aldric and Sarah rigged a rope system and hauled Marcus up, then carried him to the field hospital that was being established in the captured fortifications. The healers were overwhelmed. 3 clerics and 2 lay healers trying to manage dozens of critical patients. They triaged ruthlessly mortal wounds that required immediate divine intervention, serious injuries that could wait, and those too far gone to save. Marcus was classified as serious. His leg would be splinted and he would receive a lesser restoration spell when one became available. But he would survive. "Stay still," Aldric told him as Marcus's eyes fluttered open. "You're safe. Your leg is broken, but you'll heal. Did we win?" Marcus's voice was slurred, either from pain or the mild concussion he had sustained. "We took the pass. Good. That's good." Marcus's eyes closed again. Tell him I thought about the farm. At the end, I mean. Tell him I thought about home. You'll tell him yourself when you recover." But Marcus was already unconscious again, his body shutting down to conserve energy for healing. Aldric left him in the healer's care and returned to the battlefield. The looting had begun, a necessary if distasteful tradition. Dead soldiers had no use for their equipment, and the living needed everything they could scavenge. He found his own spear, the shaft cracked but still functional, and a better quality shield to replace the one he had thrown at the Coalition mage. The mage, Aldric returned to where he had killed the man, finding the body already stripped of valuables by other scavengers. The face was still recognizable, middle-aged, with the distinctive facial tattoos of Kelmer, confirming the intelligence about Coalition hiring practices. Aldric felt nothing looking at the corpse. No guilt, no satisfaction, just the hollow acknowledgement that he had killed to survive and would likely need to do so again. That was stupid. Aldric turned to find Garrett standing nearby, his armor remarkably clean for someone who had supposedly been in melee combat. "Charging the mage platform," Garrett clarified. "Tactically brilliant, but personally suicidal. You got lucky. Luck is what we have when skill isn't enough." Garrett smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I saw what you did. Saw you rally when the line was breaking. Saw you take down the biggest threat on the field. He moved closer. You fought like someone who still thinks he's in command. That's dangerous, Private. Makes you stand out. Makes you a target for both sides, the enemy because you're effective, your own people because they'll start expecting you to save them. I did what needed doing. Exactly my point. There are 200 soldiers who could have made that charge. But you were the one who saw the opportunity and took it. Because you still think like an officer, even if you wear a private's uniform. Garrett's expression was unreadable. Sergeant Grimm noticed too. So did the other veterans. You've put a target on your back, Aldric Thorne. Before Aldric could respond, Sergeant Grimm's voice called across the battlefield. Company, form up for debrief. The survivors assembled in loose formation. 97 faces, many bearing fresh wounds, all showing the exhaustion that came after combat. Grimm stood before them, his own armor dented and bloodied. 64% casualties, Grimm began without preamble. That's below average for a vanguard assault against fortified positions. We did our job, we took the pass, and most of us lived to tell about it. The wounded will be evacuated to Fort Ironhold. The rest of us will garrison this position until relieved. He paused, his gaze sweeping across the assembled soldiers. You fought well, every one of you. The kingdom thanks you for your sacrifice. The words felt hollow, ritual phrases that satisfied official requirements without addressing the real experience. Aldric could see it in the other soldiers' faces. The disconnect between formal recognition and the visceral reality of what they had endured. Private Thorne. Aldric's attention snapped to Grimm. Your assault on the enemy mage position broke their cohesion at a critical moment. I'm recommending you for commendation and promotion to corporal. The announcement landed like a stone in still water. Aldric felt the eyes of every soldier turned toward him. Some looked pleased, others envious, a few openly hostile. He understood immediately what Garrett had warned about. He had made himself visible, differentiated himself from the anonymous mass of common soldiers. With respect, Sergeant, I decline the promotion. Silence. Even Grimm looked surprised. You decline. I was demoted to private for a reason. Until I've served my full sentence, until I've paid the debt I owe, accepting promotion would be inappropriate. Aldric kept his voice steady. I'll continue to serve as assigned, but I won't seek advancement I haven't earned. Grimm studied him for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, he nodded. Your choice, Private. The commendation stands regardless. He turned back to the company. Dismissed. Rest. Eat. Tend your wounds. We hold this position until further orders. The formation broke apart. Sira appeared at Aldric's side as he walked toward the area designated for their bivouac. That was either incredibly noble or incredibly stupid, she said. Probably both. Garrett was right, you know? You're going to have a hard time maintaining the fiction that you're just another soldier. Not after today. Aldric found a relatively clean patch of ground and sat, every muscle in his body protesting. I don't want to be special. I don't want to stand out. I just want to survive long enough to understand what any of this means. And what does it mean? Sarah asked, sitting beside him. I don't know yet, but I think... He paused, organizing his thoughts. As an officer, I sent soldiers into battle. I calculated acceptable losses, made decisions that got people killed, and told myself it was necessary for the greater good. I was disconnected from the actual cost because I wasn't the one paying it. But now, standing in the line, feeling the arrows fall, watching people I know die. He looked at his hands, still stained with blood. Now I understand what I was asking. And I don't know if I was right to ask it. Sarah was quiet for a moment. Then, my people have a saying. The wolf that leads the pack eats first, but the wolf that survives the winter is the one that remembers it's part of a pack. You're learning to be part of the pack, Aldric. That's not a failure. That's growth. Over the next 3 days, the survivors of Grimm's company held Black Ridge Pass while Kingdom engineers fortified the position and brought up siege equipment. The work was endless, repairing walls, setting watches, clearing bodies, maintaining weapons. Aldric threw himself into the labor, grateful for physical tasks that occupied his mind. Marcus was evacuated with the others seriously wounded, carried on a stretcher to Fort Ironhold, and from there to a proper hospital in the rear territories. Before he left, Aldric returned the wooden horse carving. Found this on the battlefield, Aldric said. Thought you'd want it back. Marcus clutched the carving like a lifeline. Thank you, and Aldric? Thank you for getting me out of that pit. The healer said if I'd been there much longer. He didn't finish the sentence. You'd have done the same. Maybe, but you actually did it. That counts for something. News filtered in from other fronts. The assault on Blackridge Pass had been part of a larger offensive. 2 other passes had been attacked simultaneously, with mixed results. The northern assault had failed completely, driven back with catastrophic casualties. The southern assault had succeeded, but at such high cost that the position was immediately abandoned as untenable. Blackridge was the only clear victory, which meant Grimm's company had achieved something genuinely significant. It didn't make the dead any less dead. On the 4th day, Corporal Elena Brightwater arrived with supply wagons and reinforcements. She found Aldric on the wall, standing watch over the approach to the pass. "You survived," she said without preamble. "Apparently, I saw your charge on the mage platform." That was... She searched for words. Reckless. Brilliant. Completely insane. All 3, probably. Elena handed him a sealed letter. "This is for you. Don't open it here. Too many eyes." "But it's important." Aldric tucked the letter into his tunic. "What's in it?" "Proof. About Grimridge Pass. About the intelligence failure. About everything I suspected." Her amber eyes were intense. "I've been digging deeper. The corruption goes higher than I thought. Lord Chancellor Vex wasn't just removing rivals, he was deliberately sabotaging operations to create vacancies he could fill with loyalists. Your demotion wasn't punishment for failure. It was the final step in removing an obstacle. The implications were staggering. If Elena was right, then 23 soldiers had died not in service to the kingdom, but as collateral damage in a political power play. And Aldric's demotion, his assignment to the vanguard, his near death in combat, all of it orchestrated by ambitious men playing games with human lives. "What do you want me to do?" Aldric asked. "Right now? Nothing. You're still serving your sentence, and any accusations you make will be dismissed as bitterness from a disgraced officer. But when you're reinstated, and you will be, because Grimm's commendation and your survival will force their hand, when you're reinstated, we go public. We expose everything that could destroy careers. It could damage the military's credibility. Good, it should. Because right now, the military is being led by men who care more about power than people. And that's worth fighting against." Elena's expression softened. "I'm not asking you to decide now. Just read the letter, consider it, and survive, Aldric. Please survive." She left before he could respond. That night, Aldric read the letter by candlelight in a quiet corner of the fortifications. Elena's evidence was meticulously documented, communications showing Vex's influence over intelligence operations, testimony from officers who had been pressured to falsify reports, financial records proving bribes paid to key personnel. It was damning, comprehensive, and absolutely dangerous to possess. Aldric burned the letter after memorizing its contents. The physical evidence was gone, but the knowledge remained, a weight heavier than any armor. He thought about justice and revenge, about the 23 soldiers who deserved better than to be forgotten as statistics. He thought about the system that had created this situation, where ambitious officers could sacrifice the lives of common soldiers without consequence. And he thought about his own role, both as the commander who had been manipulated and as the private who had survived. Garrett's philosophy echoed in his mind. The man survived by thinking of himself as already dead, by releasing attachment to life and therefore to fear. But Aldric realized that wasn't the answer. Survival wasn't about abandoning life. It was about valuing it enough to fight for it, not just for yourself but for others. 2 weeks after the battle, new orders arrived. Grimm's company was being rotated back to Fort Ironhold for rest and refit. Aldric had officially completed his vanguard service. The debt, at least in the military's eyes, was paid. Sergeant Grimm called him into the small office that had been set up in the captured fortifications. The sergeant looked older, more worn, as if the battle had aged him years and days. "Your sentence is complete, Private Thorne. As of tomorrow, you're being transferred back to regular infantry with eligibility for promotion based on merit." Grimm pulled out a pipe, lit it with his usual prestidigitation cantrip. "I've submitted my recommendation for corporal. The commendation for your actions during the assault will be part of your permanent record. With your experience and demonstrated capability, you'll probably make lieutenant again within a year. And if I refuse promotion again? Grim raised an eyebrow. Why would you? Because I learned something in the vanguard, Sergeant. I learned that leadership isn't about tactics or strategy or even success. It's about understanding the cost of your decisions because you've paid that cost yourself. And I don't know if I'm ready to ask others to pay it again. That's exactly why you should be an officer. Grim said quietly. Men who are too eager to command get soldiers killed through carelessness. Men who understand the weight of command, who hesitate because they know the price, those are the leaders worth following. Even if I was set up? Even if the failure at Grimridge wasn't entirely my fault? Grim's expression didn't change. I read your file more carefully than you might think, Thorne. I read between the lines. I know what happened to you, even if I can't prove it. And I know that when the military machine wants to crush someone, it usually succeeds. The fact that you're still here, still fighting, still thinking about the welfare of soldiers, that tells me everything I need to know about your character. He stood, extending his hand. You've paid your debt, Aldric Thorne. Not because the brass says so, but because you earned it in blood and fire. What you do next is up to you. Aldric shook the offered hand. Thank you, Sergeant. Don't thank me. Just don't waste what you've learned. The return march to Fort Ironhold was surreal. Aldric walked with the survivors of Grim's company, now numbering just over 100 after reinforcements had brought them back to minimal strength. Sierra walked beside him, silent but present. Garrett had been reassigned to another unit. His unique philosophy of survival needed elsewhere. The red-bearded veteran had offered Aldric a single piece of parting advice. You can't save everyone, but you can honor them by not forgetting. Marcus was waiting at Fort Ironhold, recovered enough to stand on crutches. His leg would heal fully in time, the healers said, though he might always walk with a slight limp. The young soldier's eyes were different now, older, haunted by things seen and survived. They're sending me home, Marcus said. Medical discharge, partial pension. Back to the farm? Back to the farm? Marcus managed a smile. Maybe that's not such a bad thing. The land always needs tending, like my day said. And at least I'll know what I'm fighting for, next year's harvest instead of some politician's ambition. They embraced briefly, two soldiers who had survived what many hadn't. If you ever find yourself near Millhaven, Marcus said, look for Ironfoot Farm. We'll have a place at the table for you. I'll remember that. Alone in his quarters that night, an actual room with a door. A luxury after weeks in the field, Aldric contemplated his options. He could accept the promotion, work his way back up the ranks, and eventually expose the corruption that had cost 23 lives. He could refuse promotion, remain a common soldier, and avoid the political battlefield entirely. Or he could leave the military altogether, walk away from the institution that had betrayed him. But leaving felt like abandoning the soldiers who couldn't leave. The Marcus Ironfoots and Sarah Blackthorns, who deserved better leadership than ambitious officers playing power games. Morning brought a visitor. General Marvis Blackwood, the same officer who had presided over Aldric's demotion, stood in the doorway of his quarters. Walk with me, Captain Thorne. I'm a private general. Not anymore. As of this morning, you've been reinstated to your former rank with full privileges and back pay. The commendation from Sergeant Grimm, combined with your survival and exemplary service in the vanguard, has satisfied the requirements of your sentence. They walked through the fort in silence, eventually arriving at a small garden maintained by off-duty soldiers. Blackwood sat on a stone bench and gestured for Aldric to join him. I owe you an apology, the general said quietly. I knew the intelligence about Grimridge was questionable. I suspected political manipulation, but I was ordered to make an example and I chose the path of least resistance. I sent you into the vanguard expecting you to die there, and I told myself it was justice. Aldric said nothing, waiting. But you didn't die. You survived, and more than that, you proved what kind of officer you truly are. Not the kind who makes excuses or seeks revenge, but the kind who focuses on doing right by the soldiers under their command. Blackwood pulled out a sealed envelope. This is a new assignment. Command of a full company, your choice of personnel, autonomy in how you train and deploy them. It's a chance to build the kind of unit you think the kingdom needs. And the corruption? The false intelligence? The dead soldiers? Being investigated. Quietly but thoroughly. Lord Chancellor Vex has powerful friends, but his enemies are numerous and patient. Your friend Corporal Brightwater has been very helpful in providing evidence. Blackwood's expression was grave. I can't promise justice will be swift or complete, but I can promise it's being pursued. Aldric took the envelope, but didn't open it. Why are you telling me this? Because you deserve to know. And because I need officers who understand the cost of command. The kingdom faces threats on multiple fronts: the Crimson Coalition, the Shadowfell incursions, the political instability at home. We need leaders who will fight for the right reasons, who will value soldiers' lives above personal advancement. That's a lot of weight to put on one captain. Then gather others who think the same way. Build a network of officers who prioritize mission and people over politics. Change the culture from within. Blackwood stood. Or don't. The choice is yours, Captain Thorne. But choose knowing that the soldiers who died at Grimridge and the ones who died taking Blackridge Pass deserve better than the military they served. After the general left, Aldric opened the envelope. Inside was formal paperwork reassigning him to command of a new company being formed specifically for rapid response operations. He would have authority to recruit his own officers and NCOs, set his own training standards, and develop tactics without interference from higher command within reason. It was everything he had lost and more. A chance to rebuild, to create something better. He thought about Marcus, heading home to tend his family's farm. About Sarah, who would continue serving because she knew no other life. About the 97 survivors of Grimm's company, each carrying their own scars from Blackridge Pass. About the 23 who had died at Grimridge, their names etched in his memory like epitaphs. Aldric walked to the fort's wall and looked out over the Thornwall Mountains. Somewhere beyond those peaks, the war continued. Soldiers were fighting and dying, often for reasons they didn't fully understand. Led by officers who might or might not care about their welfare, he couldn't save everyone. Garrett had been right about that. But he could honor the fallen by not forgetting, by building something better, by ensuring that future soldiers had leaders who understood the true cost of command. The next morning, Aldric accepted the assignment. His first act as a reinstated captain was to request Corporal Elena Brightwater as his executive officer. His second was to send a message to Sergeant Grimm, asking if the old veteran would consider a transfer to help train the new company. His third was to visit the Fortress Memorial Wall, where names of the fallen were inscribed. He found the 23 from Grimridge Pass and traced each name with his finger, committing them once more to memory. "I can't bring you back," he said quietly. "I can't undo what was done, but I can make sure your deaths meant something. I can make sure the next generation of soldiers has better leadership, better support, better chances." It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But it was what he had to offer, the commitment to build something better from the ruins of what had been broken. As Captain Aldric Thorne walked away from the memorial, he carried the weight of command once more. But this time, he carried it with understanding earned in the vanguard, where he had learned that true leadership wasn't about tactics or glory or personal advancement. It was about knowing the cost of every decision because you had stood in the first line, felt the arrows fall, and survived to remember those who hadn't. The war would continue. Battles would be fought and won and lost. Soldiers would die and others would live to question why. But in the spaces between the violence, in the choices made by those who led, perhaps something better could be built. Not redemption, not absolution. Just the quiet determination to honor the fallen by ensuring their sacrifice mattered. And in a world of politics and corruption and endless conflict, that was a battle worth fighting. If this journey has captivated you so far, prove you want more. Subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and strengthen this world. Every bit of support keeps the story alive, brings new chapters, bigger battles, and unexpected destinies. Your choice decides whether the next adventure begins now or remains dormant forever.